Hello, welcome. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about a topic that I've been thinking of for quite some time, but I hadn't made it into a video yet. And that is, what were the deciding factors going into making a new console for both Sony and Microsoft? A lot of people, they think that if one side designs a console well, then the other side must have failed. But if you look through all of the specs and all of the evidence and everything we've gone through in the last 8 months or so with the pandemic and the processor shortage, I think you'll find that both sides implemented their strategies really well and they had the right strategies to begin with. So I think they'll be happy with the performance of their consoles and the way that they designed those consoles. Okay, so if you like this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And we have a Discord server, so come along and join us there. And I'll leave a link in the description below. Okay, so we're going to go straight into this video. And I made this video about the PS5 Expandable SSD, but it actually had a comment about how Microsoft and Sony designed the consoles, which is why I kind of am making this video today. But I thought it was a good comment, at least a good starting point anyways. And this is a comment from Grow Team. He says, "Good work, Jim. Sony was out-engineered from day one. Xbox Series X, being better sum of all its parts and velocity architecture and ML hardware, will outlast PS5 raw speed." So I'm not going to read the rest of it because there's a lot there. But essentially he says the Sony PS5 wasn't as well designed as the Microsoft Xbox Series X. But I think there's a lot in it, not just from a specs perspective, but also what is actually happening in terms of business and how many units you can get out there as well. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at the design factors going into making these consoles. And I think you'll find that it's more than just actually making the most powerful console. So we're going to go into these specs. And I know you guys know them all already, so we're just going to do it really quick. So we've got the PS5 with a GPU of 10.28 teraflops. That has 36 compute units at 2.2 gigahertz. The Xbox Series X is a GPU with 12 teraflops and 52 compute units at 1.8 gigahertz. And the Xbox Series S as well. So that has 20 compute units at 1.56 gigahertz. Now, some people might be thinking, why didn't PS5 just make a console that performs just as fast as the Xbox Series X? And I think there are many factors. It's not just about the specs and making the most powerful console. The Xbox Series X has 52 compute units. That's a much bigger die, a much bigger processor than the PS5 36 compute unit processor. And so if the processors are actually limited, then you'll find that then they have to think of other ways to make more of them so that they can get more units out there so that their market share can be as big as it can be. So let's take a look at the die sizes for the PS5 and Xbox Series X and the Series S as well. So the PS5 die is 308 millimeters squared. The Xbox Series X die is 360 millimeters squared. And the Series S die is 197 millimeters squared. So what we're going to do is we're going to work out how many dies you're going to get with a 300 millimeter wafer. So I prepared this a little bit earlier, and we're just going to bring this across. I'll put that there. But we're going to do a few calculations. So 306 millimeters squared for the PS5 gives us 17.5, I think. Was it 17.5? Yep, 17.5. That gives us 131 dies for the PS5. And then for the Xbox Series X was 360. That's 18.97. So that works out to be 104 dies. And for the Series S, so that's a much smaller die. That's 14. So, and it doesn't matter too much if they're rectangles or squares. It more or less works out to be about the same. So we're talking about 242 good dies. So I'll bring this over here. So let's talk a little bit about strategy for both sides. Now, PS5, they want to get as many units out there as possible. And we saw what happened with the pandemic and also the processor shortage last year. We saw that Nvidia went to Samsung just to get more volume out, and they intended to outship the AMD Radeon GPUs. AMD decided that they wanted to stick on TSMC and make everything with TSMC, and that was fine. But Nvidia, if they were on TSMC, they would sell a lot less units than they would if they were on Samsung. At Samsung, they pretty much had the fab all to themselves, so they could get as much volume out as they could. And they made the right decision at the end because they had record profits at the end. So the same issue applies with Sony and also Microsoft in terms of the consoles as well. So there's a limited amount of wafers available because everybody was at TSMC. And so PS5, they wanted to make as many units as possible because being the leader for the PS4 probably meant that they had to get as many units out there as they could. Otherwise, they would lose some sales to the Xbox Series X. So obviously, they wanted to get a die size that was going to be a little bit smaller than the Xbox Series X. And so they didn't mind losing out a little bit on performance as long as the games look pretty close. So I think most people will find that if you put up a PS5 to an Xbox Series X game, most lay persons or most lay people probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference anyways. And that was all that really mattered. As long as, say, Digital Foundry, your frame rates are very relatively close, your resolutions are relatively close, most people aren't going to pixel count and go, hey, this is missing like, 2% or 5% of the pixels of the Xbox Series X version, and then I'm going to get the Xbox Series X console. Most people go, hey, it's close enough, so it doesn't really matter that much. So that's why the PS5 didn't mind too much on losing some of that performance. And so they went with a smaller die, which meant they could get about 25% more wafers out there for the same amount of wafers. So that was the PS5. Now, with the Xbox Series X, they were actually coming from behind from last generation. So Xbox One, I think it sold about 50 to 60 million units versus the PS4, which was at about 115 million units. So they probably knew that they weren't going to sell as many units as the PS5. So they could probably afford to go the other route and say, okay, I'm not going to sell as many units, so I'm going to make a console that is a little bit better in terms of performance and market it that way. So a lot of the early adopters, they see that this console is a little bit faster than the other, so therefore I'm just going to buy this one because it'll probably be better for third-party games. So they were trying to claw back some of that market share that way. And so they designed the Xbox Series X, and that has a very large die, 52 compute units, and that has a price of $499. They knew they had to match the PS5 anyway in terms of price. However, they didn't want to lower their price down to $399, which is what the PS5 digital edition without the disk drive sells for. They didn't want to do that because they would be selling that 52 compute unit die at $399. They didn't want to do that. So what they did instead, which is rather clever, is to make an Xbox Series S. So they cut up even more of the wafer, and they got 2.4 times more dies than they would have if they cut a Series X wafer. So the 197 millimeter squared, 240 dies, they were able to sell those for $299. And so that they were also able to get a good entry point for people who want a lower cost system, but they didn't have to sell their Series X at $399 and lose $100 that way. So as you can see how it all plays out, that everybody tried to maximize what they had based on previous sales of their last generation and also what they might be expected to sell. And that also came into how they designed the consoles as well. So it's not always just about performance. And yes, PS5, they had a 36 compute unit. Maybe they overclocked it somewhat. But again, they wanted to get as many units out there as possible. And in the end, through clever technology and clever engineering, they were able to get a console that roughly matched the performance of the Xbox Series X. So as you can see, both sides did really well in terms of strategy, in terms of foresight of what was going to happen in the market, and also in terms of what the console experience in the end. Because really, if you put the PS5 and Xbox Series X side by side, it's really hard to tell like what the difference is in terms of the third-party games and performance. Okay, so that's my take on the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and Series S and why they designed the consoles the way they did. Let me know your thoughts on this topic below. Did you think that Sony made the right move, making a less powerful console but getting more units out there? And did you think that the Xbox Series X was designed correctly? Okay, so that's going to be it for this one. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next one.